2, 1.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show. Sorry about that. We will edit all that nonsense out. Thanks for joining me on this Sunday. I know it's Sunday afternoon, right after church for most of you, I'm sure. And somebody from Italy. We're going to be talking about Italy today. We're going to be talking about Starbucks in Italy today, so that'll be fun. So I'm interested in any commentary from Italy itself. But the country most identified with coffee now finally has a Starbucks, and we will talk about that. All right, I want to start off with a question from a Patreon contributor, kind of the last question I'm going to take from this batch of Patreon question, and this one has to do with the MeToo movement. We're also going to talk, as I said, about Starbucks in Italy. We're going to talk about, what else? I had a list. Anyway, we're going to talk about Jack Ryan, Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan, the new series on Amazon. Just a quick observation about it. I think it's interesting. Maybe about what's going on in Iraq, which is not making the news and nobody seems to care. And potentially something about healthcare, which I think is really, really interesting. So that's the program. And of course, Super Chat questions, always open to answering those. So if you want to ask a question today on the show, the best way to do it is go to YouTube. Those of you listening on other platforms or watching on other platforms, and put in a Super Chat. Super Chat is where you actually pay to ask the question. The payment goes to Brook Media, to the Yaron Brook Show. All right, so if can't think of a name, wants to ask a question, you can do it Super Chat. There's a $ at the bottom of the chat feature in YouTube. You can use that, but you can also go to patreon.com/Yaron Brook Show and become a contributor, and then you can ask regular questions as part of the contribution. If you want to ask a question today, now, the only way to do that really is to use the Super Chat feature on YouTube. So figure it out. It's not that technically difficult. It's right there. Me Too, the Me Too movement. So I don't want to go into the whole history of the Me Too movement. I assume you guys mostly know the Me Too movement, but for those of you who don't, it's really a movement that started about a decade ago. It was first initiated by a woman by the name of Yaron Brook, who really established this as a movement that was dedicated to eliminating sexual violence against women primarily, but focused on sexual violence, focused on issues of rape, sexual harassment, and really was dedicated to the idea that sexual violence and harassment in a variety of different forms are far more prevalent in the culture, than is usually admitted. That mostly people who are sexually harassed feel shame about that sexual harassment and keep it quiet, or don't want to get into the details, and it's a well-known phenomena that only a certain percentage of rapes are actually disclosed. Actually, what do you call it? Do the women go to the police? Or because there's a huge issue of the attitude, particularly in the United States of America, towards sex, towards rape, towards women, towards the objectification of women. The whole idea that you brought it upon yourself. If you wear sexy clothes, it's your fault if you're raped. Those are real attitudes. Those are real attitudes that really exist. And that women have suffered from those kind of attitudes, I think, for generations, from the beginning of time, but certainly have suffered even in the present day. All right, so the Me Too movement has existed. It was small for about a decade, fighting against sexual violence against women. And look, we're against violence. We're against initiation of force. The fact that it's sexual is an aspect of it. It's an important aspect, particularly for the police, particularly for prosecution, particularly for the issue of justice. But at the end of the day, to commit violence against another person is immoral and illegal, and people should go to jail over it. To commit rape is kind of some of the worst form of violence one could commit against another human being. And I've always said, if you're a rapist or if you're a murderer, if you commit violent crime against other people, violence where you're literally beating them in one way or another, throw away the keys. Put you in jail and throw away the keys. There's never an excuse to initiate force, to initiate physical force against another human being, and to rape somebody, and that is so intimate and so personal. To rape somebody it requires initiation and continuation of force to such an extent that it's unforgivable. And in that sense, throw away the keys. Put the rapist away. Throw away the keys. So I'm not sympathetic to any of that. All right, we'll get to the super chat in a little while. I'm trying not to get distracted by your super chat questions. I want to talk about the MeToo movement. There's another one. So to the extent that the MeToo movement, to the extent that for years and years and years they fought against sexual violence, they brought sexual violence to the forefront, where it is often hidden, it is often not discussed, people are often uncomfortable talking about it, and they brought it to the forefront, and they emboldened women to talk about and to address the experiences they're having in terms of violence against them. Again, there is a long history of women not talking about it, of women being harassed and not complaining about it, women being harassed and or even raped and not wanting to admit it primarily because of the sexual norms in the U.S. I think this is far less frequent. This silence is far less frequent in Europe, is far less frequent in places like Israel. Because sexual norms are very different. Sex is not something to be hidden. Sex is not something to be ashamed of. Sex is not something to be embarrassed by. And as a consequence, people are, when they're raped, when a sexual violence actually happens, they're willing to stand up against it. Oh, I'm already being told that I'm wrong about this. What have I said that I could be wrong about? Right? So far, everything I've said is just factual. It's just reality. It's just existent, right? And the fact is that the movement originally was about this. Now, about a year ago, because of the allegations launched against Harvey Weinstein by, Milano? I don't know the names of the actresses and actors and all these celebrities. But because of the allegations launched against Harvey Weinstein, this Me Too movement just exploded. And the question was asked of women, I guess, on Twitter by Alicia Milano. I think that she did it on Twitter. If you have ever been sexually harassed, or if you have been raped or physically coerced, then say so on Twitter. And this just blew up, and there was something like 500,000 Me Too statements, and Jesse says I'm wrong because I'm not talking about what the movement represents today. I haven't gotten to today. How can I be wrong if I haven't talked about today? Right? Jesus. Listen. I'm sorry, I get angry at you guys, but listen, right? Otherwise, and I like the interaction. I like having the chat because I like the interaction. But if you're not actually listening to what I'm saying, don't comment. All right. So there was this huge gush of people who announced that they too had been sexually harassed. Now, I want to take a step back, and again, I'm taking a step back. I still haven't commented on the Me Too movement as it is today. I want to take a step back and separate out a number of different issues. There is the issue of rape. There's the issue of rape, which is clear-cut in my view. You commit rape, you've given up all all rights to your freedom. You've given it all up. You should be locked up and finished. That's one, right? That's rape. Second is, violence is being inflicted on you without it actually getting to rape, right? And people have groped, people grope you, they try to rape you, they physically abuse you. Again, that's clear cut. That is assault. The extent of the assault will determine the sentencing, but it's unforgivable. There's no excuse to grope somebody from the other sex uninvited. There's no excuse to use violence against another human being, no matter what sex they are, no matter what they are wearing. I don't care if they're walking nude in the streets. It's their body, it's not yours. Now, if they're walking nude in the streets, you can look, you can admire. I'd even say you could whistle because they're asking for it. But you can't touch. The fact that they're walking in the street naked doesn't make it your property. So there's a variety. There's a variety of different levels of physical, from groping or assaulting or being really physically harassing. It's, that's clear cut. That's obviously wrong. Right? Then there's the issue of somebody, I don't know, making sexual comments to somebody. Now, this is more complex because it is, they haven't physically harmed the other person. It's, it might be uninvited, but then but there's no law against it. There can't be a law against speech unless you are so abusive as to be threatening, and then it should be treated as a threat. So there are all kinds of degrees, right? All the way from I'm hugging you to say hello to I'm complimenting you on your clothes and how sexy, or complimenting you on your clothes, to I'm complimenting you on how sexy you look, to I'm demanding or asking for sex, demanding sex, and groping. That is a continuum, right? It's a continuum. And there has to be clear definitions, and the law, I believe, has those clear definitions. So I don't think this is an issue of the law. I think the law probably has definitions between what is actually physical harassment, what is intimidation, what is just being stupid, or being inappropriate, or being a bad coworker, or being a bad employee, or being a bad boss. In which case, the solution in those cases is probably to quit and resign, right? Whereas the solution if it's physical, is police, right? If it's threat, it's again the police. If it's just verbal, if it's just, hey, I want to have sex with you and I'm going to say that every time I see you, then the solution is to quit, to complain. If you're a valued employee, the company will keep you and fire their boss. And I think it's absolutely appropriate when somebody is touching you, not harassing, not violently touching you, but touching you inappropriately, hugging you when you don't want to be hugged, telling you how sexy you look when you don't want to be told, or you're not interested in his opinion about that. It's completely appropriate to complain within a workplace and to get rid of all of that. Now, to the extent that there are laws that you cannot say certain things in certain environments, those laws are non-objective. Those laws are non-objective. There is no such thing as hate speech. There is no such thing as sexually offensive speech that needs to be dealt with by the government. The only job of government is the protection of individual rights. If all I'm doing is speaking, unless I'm inciting violence or labeling you, then I have a right to say what I want to say. And then my boss has every right to fire me if he doesn't like what I say. And you have every right to quit if my boss likes what I want to say and doesn't like you complaining about it. Unfortunately, all those things should be legal. Fortunately, all those things should be legal. Unfortunately, they're not. It's almost impossible to fire somebody. Now again, when I say violent, I include threats in that. Threat is a form of violence. To threaten somebody is to violently abuse somebody. So threatening and violence is the same. So I think it's crucial to separate the MeToo movement into those who are truly committed to fighting against violence against women, and I'm all with them. And I actually think, to that extent, the MeToo movement has been a positive thing. Because for years and years and years, in dorm rooms in colleges, and in corporate settings, and in Hollywood, and in the, I'm sure, in the, modeling business, and in every business, there has been the use of violence against primarily young women who were too afraid and too intimidated to stand up to their attackers or to complain later. And to the extent that the MeToo movement has given those women a voice, to the extent that the MeToo movement has led to a reduction in violence, that I'm all for it, has led to more women speaking up, where a scumbag like Harvey Weinstein is going to go to jail because he actually raped women, because he actually forced women. He didn't always rape them, but he used force against them, and he just did disgusting things that maybe are not criminal, but certainly should be brought into the light of day, and his position as this respected producer in Hollywood should have been destroyed, eviscerated. His life should have been destroyed as it was. As it indeed was. So good for the Me Too movement for destroying the life of Harvey Weinstein. He deserved it. Even if he'd never raped anybody, he deserved it. So the idea of coming out and saying, my boss demanded sex in order to give me a raise, for women to announce that, to let the world know that these scumbags exist, is great. And to the extent that it has emboldened them not only on the issue of violence, but also on the issue of, voluntary sex, but for something like a raise. Well, these guys are they're scumbags. They're bad people. They shouldn't go to jail. But I'm fine with them losing their jobs. Not because the law says they should lose their jobs, but because their bosses or their shareholders or their suppliers or their customers don't want to deal with scumbags. And it also, Jesse says, it is a position of privilege to be able to get ahead in life through sex. If I could sleep with my female boss to get a leg up, I would be all over that. Well, you're a shallow, ridiculous human being, Jesse. I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to insult my audience, but what the hell, right? No, sex is far too important to give it up for money, for a raise. Sex is far too valuable an experience to do it for some external reason not associated with the emotional connection you have with the person you're having sex with. It truly is revulsing to me, the idea of having sex with a boss to get ahead in life. That is the lowest form. Now, plus, what does it do to your self-esteem? You didn't get ahead because you're good at your job. You got ahead because the boss thought you were a piece of meat to satisfy their sexual pleasures in that day. What does that say about what kind of self-esteem is that going to give you in terms of your success in the job that you have? Yeah, Action Jackson. You get the straight scoop from me. I will insult my audience. And I know I lose a lot of you as a consequence, so my numbers are nowhere as high as they otherwise would be. But I cannot do anything but tell the truth. And I get angry. I'm an emotional guy. I'm a passionate guy, right? I'm not an emotionalist. But I'm emotional. If I see something that I think is ridiculous, I'm going to say it's ridiculous. But the reason we work is not to make money. The reason we work is not to get a raise. The reason we work is not to get ahead. The reason we work is to gain self-esteem. The work should be part of a career. The career should be a set of goals, a set of achievements that we want to achieve, that when we attain, we can say, yes, I'm worthy. I've succeeded in life. If you sleep your way to the top, what have you said to yourself? It's almost like stealing, not quite, but almost like stealing your way to the top. So no, the person who demands it is an evil, lousy, horrible, pathetic boss. Because what they're saying is, I'm not going to advance you based on your merits. I'm going to advance you based on my whim, my sexual pleasure. And I don't care if it's voluntary. Not every voluntary transaction is a good transaction. Not every voluntary transaction is a moral transaction. Not every voluntary transaction is worthy. Haven't women always had sex with men in exchange for resources, though? No. Certainly not in the modern world. The whole idea of the modern world, the whole idea of the wealth that we have, is so that we don't have to have sex for resources. We've advanced beyond the primitive state over the last 250 years. The whole discovery of the idea of romantic love, which is really an idea of the 19th century, is to move us above and beyond using sex as barter, as a way of advancing materially. And yes, it's still true in primitive cultures. It's still true that arranged marriages and women look for men who have money because that's the only way they can get ahead. Hopefully, I wish that we're beyond that. That we've advanced. That now women can go make their own living. You might have, your boss is a female. How insulting is that? I'm kidding. But in that traditional context, right? We don't live in the 18th, 17th, 13th, 12th centuries. We live in 21st century. We live in a century in which wealth is created by the use of the human mind. We live in an age where work is primarily intellectual work. We live in an age where you should be measured by your capacity to create, to produce, to make, by how productive you are. And that is not limited by sex. And it shouldn't be determined by whether your boss wants to have sex with you or not. It's disgusting. So to the extent that we out the bosses in the world that want to advance their employees based on sex, to that extent the world becomes a better place. And to that extent, I applaud the MeToo movement. To the extent that they out these people, to the extent that both on the physical violence sense, I think we can all agree on that. I think that's easy. But even those scumbags who want to use sex as a means of power over other people, those who want to use sex in the workplace as a means of advancing other people, whether they're men or women, gay or straight or whatever, doesn't matter. They should, it's great that they're being outed. Well, if so somebody's asking about Dominique Franken in the Foundation. If Dominique Franken thought she had been raped, then she would have. Dominique Franken was no weakling. If she thought she was raped, if she thought she had been violated, you would have never heard the end of it, and Rourke would have spent the rest of his life in jail. I mean, she was a powerful, strong woman. I haven't got to what consensual sex looks like. But the idea that men should go about raping women because it says so in the Fountainhead is bizarre and absurd, and Ayn Rand would be horrified by that notion. Or that it's okay to demand sex when the other party doesn't love you in order to get something, or to demand sex for any reason, is absurd. So, again, I commend the MeToo movement for doing all that. Now, saying all that, the MeToo movement has also become a travesty in this sense that now women are complaining about any sexual encounter that doesn't satisfy them. Not all women, some women. So there were a number of examples where the sex wasn't good, or the sex wasn't the right kind of sex. It's no longer an issue of the sex was used to get me a raise or something like that that was demanded of me. It's not an issue of I was harassed. It's not an issue anymore of rape, violence. You know, there was that, I think he's an Indian actor who was accused of basically just bad sex. Then, of course, there's the whole issue of what are the boundaries? Can you not hug a woman at work to say hello? It would be sad if that were the case. But I can understand if some women don't want to be hugged, then you shouldn't hug them. But say so. Just talk. The solution to a lot of these issues, I mean, I'm not talking about the scumbags. I'm talking about the issues between men and women on a day-to-day basis, is to talk, is to communicate. Again, sex should not be something that we can't talk about. You don't want me to touch you, that's fine. I don't need to touch you. I'm not going to be insulted if a woman says, I feel uncomfortable if you hug me. I'm getting all these girls offering sex in exchange for their assignment. I mean, I had female students. Not one, not that many. Maybe I'm not that good looking, but I had at least one student who said she got a B and she wanted an A, and she basically said she would do anything for me to get an A. Anything was obvious what it implied. In my office, I used to keep the door always open during student hours, always open. I was never in a room with a female student by myself. I never wanted to be in a situation where they could claim something happened, or they would ask a question, or they would initiate something. So the door was always open. But I got asked. I once was asked by a female student explicitly about sex, and I said, no, and inappropriate, and I'm married. And she said, so what? I'm married too. But you know what? It's not worth it. It's not worth it. So the best mechanism to deal with fear that I think men have today of how to engage in a relationship with a woman. Let me go to the question, because the question was, what is the rational objectivist approach in response to the MeToo movement? I've answered some of that. How should young objectivists, male and female, deal with engaging in romantic, potentially sexual relations in the midst of the MeToo movement environment, where it seems that men are demonized a priori, much like original sin, and trust between potential partners seem to be breaking down? I mean, my view is this. If you want a relationship with a woman and you discover early on that she is demonizing you because you're a man, then you shouldn't have a relationship with her. Then walk away. So I don't want to have a relationship with a woman who thinks that if I attempt to hold her hand, I've engaged in rape. If she gets angry because I held her hand, then I don't want to have a relationship with her, right? So I acknowledge that if women become overly sensitized to physical contact because the Me Too movement has taught them that any physical contact by males is almost the equivalent of rape, then that is horrible and horrific. And walk away from women like that. Just walk away. Now, on the other hand, while you don't want to break the romantic spell of, acting without talking, right? Communication is key. And being sensitive to a woman saying no, and no is no. Now, for example, the fairly pretty simple rules about this. If the woman you're with is been drinking, don't have sex with her. If you've been drinking a huge amount, then don't have sex. You're not in control. You don't know what you're doing. It's not going to be fun. It's not going to be that enjoyable, and you're not going to remember any of it anyway. So just avoid combining large quantities of alcohol with sex. What else? If you're making out and a girl says, don't touch me there, then don't touch her there. Later you can ask her why, and you can negotiate. Never, ever demand sex. Not from an employee, not from a boss, not from anybody. You don't demand sex. Sex should be something that is mutually, something you both want strongly, desire strongly. It shouldn't be something you have to beg for and ask for. Certainly not something you demand. Just treat women as human beings, as equals. And if you're a woman, if a guy, touches you in a way that you think is inappropriate, tell him. Just tell him. Without making it into a rape case, just tell him, I don't like being touched there. Or, you really grabbed my hand in an inappropriate way. Fine. Fine. By the way, we have the super chat feature on YouTube. So if you really want to ask me a question, YouTube super chat is the way to do it, particularly on this issue. It would be good if you used that feature because I can't keep track of all the chat and because it's just fair, I guess. Let's see, what else? I'm trying to think of common sense kind of just in terms of, in the old days, I was young once and a long time ago. You went to the movie theater and you put your arm around the girl. And if she moved your hand, then you moved your hand. Then she doesn't want the physical contact. You try to kiss a girl, she doesn't want it, done. You don't push yourself on her. Right? No is no. And not all relationships are going to work. And yes, you have to be careful, but you have to be careful because the accusations of rape and sexual harassment are tossed around too easily. So again, be careful. For example, drinking and sex, don't combine them. And that's true of men and women. And if a woman, and I also think that women should be more aggressive when it comes to what they want sexually, right? You don't have to wait for the guy to hold your hand. You can hold his hand. You don't have to wait for the guy to ask or to ask you to have sex with him or to get, you can create the mood for sex yourself. You can create the environment for sex yourself. Sex is not just something guys want. It's part of the mythology of sexual relationships. Women should initiate when they want it. Kyle asks, what should be the proper legal response to false accusations of sexual impropriety, particularly relevant in the light of MeToo movement? I mean, I think if it's truly false, it's not mistaken, it's not unproven, it's truly false, it's malicious in that sense, then those people should be sued. There must be some laws against falsely accusing somebody of a crime. So, and it should be treated very harshly. I don't think this should be treated lightly at all. I think women, need to be, held to the same standard as men in this regard. If you're going to accuse somebody of a crime that they didn't commit, then that should be against the law. So, to the extent that they're malicious, you should be tried for it. And this is true in the Me Too. It's one way to control this Me Too, but remember, there are also these cases where, what was that case in Stanford where the kid, basically, this girl was lying there drunk and he raped her, basically, and the judge, gave him a month or gave him a week in prison or something ridiculous like that? I mean, it's pathetic. I don't care if you're drunk or not. If you commit rape, you should go to jail for a long time. All right, let me get to this question. It's an interesting question about sex and Catholicism. But anything else we have about this, right? Any questions about this? I mean, just don't get drunk. Don't get drunk to the point. You can get a little buzz, but don't get drunk to the point where you're not in control of what you're doing. But the fact that she's drunk doesn't give you an excuse to rape her. Oh, she was drunk, so I can take advantage of her. That's absurd. You know, treat other human beings with respect. Other human beings as having rights. Sex is not something you demand. Sex is something that should be mutually, it's a trade, but it's a spiritual trade. It's not a material trade. By making sex a material trade, oh, I paid for dinner, she owes me sex. No, she doesn't. And no, she doesn't. Again, that is a disgusting attitude towards sex. And it diminishes the value of sex. And it will make sex for you unimportant and insignificant and less enjoyable. Sex is a spiritual trade. Now, I'm not saying you can't have one-night stands and you can't have casual sex. You can. It's less important. It's less significant. But even then, there has to be something. There has to be some shared value. There has to be something that justifies this intense, intimate, personal activity together. And the trade is still a spiritual trade, essentially, whether you like it or not. You guys have a lot of questions about sex. Put $1 on it. Just $1, $1. And I'll answer the questions because, so if, you know, I know you have a lot of questions. I know you want a lot of stuff. Go ahead and ask. Right? Now, again, I'm not saying we should criminalize people propositioning you. You know, people are rude. People are inappropriate. People are stupid. Distance yourself from those people. Quit a job where people are misbehaving. Complain to the people above if a boss is misbehaving. Make people pay, but partially you're going to pay. That's the reality. When people are bad people, you pay. But I wouldn't tolerate a bad boss. If I had a bad boss, they either replace the boss or I leave. Don't think of yourself so little as you never quit a job. Quit. Quit. Right? So sex is a joint experience. It's a joint experience. Sex at its best gives you a sense of how wonderful, phenomenal the world is. Not because just of the physical experience you experience, but of the fact that you get to share it with a wonderful human being. Somebody who shares your values and reflects back your joy to you. It puts a giant mirror in front of your values. Right. Action Jackson asks, can a prostitute be an objectivist? What is an objectivist? What is an objectivist? You know, I don't like that. I don't like the who is an objectivist and who is not an objectivist question because I don't know what it means. Can a prostitute hold that, you know, a certain view of metaphysics? Can she fully live it? No. No. Because she is taking one of the most important aspects of human life and diminishing it and making it less significant. And to the extent that sex is a important spiritual value, she is, the prostitute, male or female, is diminishing that, is belittling that. So I don't think you can fully live. I don't think you can fully live as a prostitute. And I think being an objectivist, integrating the objectivist values and virtues into what you are and how you live would preclude that person being an objectivist. And it's not true that almost no one can be an objectivist. Everybody can be an objectivist. It just means you have to change professions if you're a prostitute. That's not hard. We all change professions all the time. As a world traveler, what is your experience being in predominantly Catholic cultures as far as their attitude towards sex versus cultures that are not as religious? It's fascinating to me. It's fascinating to me, kind of the attitudes of Catholics towards sex let's say as compared to Protestants, as compared to I don't know, atheists or secular cultures or Eastern cultures. So let's, and this is going to be superficial. Granted, I am no expert in this. I've not done a thorough survey of sexual attitudes vis-a-vis different cultures and different religions, but this is my casual observations about it, right? And about, the if you will, the kind of the culture's attitude towards sex and generally. Okay, so let's take Christianity. Generally, Christianity has a negative view of sex. Sex is related to the original sin. Sex is only to be practiced in marriage. Out of marriage, sex is a sin, and so on, right? But and generally, negative attitudes towards pornography, negative attitudes towards nudity, but what I find interesting is, particularly among Catholics, in Catholic countries, is that there's a certain attitude of, we're all sinners, and on Sunday I can go and confess and be forgiven, and let's just live. And if you go to Italy, there's a much more of a casual attitude towards sex than is in the United States. And in some ways, it's like, yeah, it's a sin. Let's, but it's fun. Let's just do it, and we'll say sorry, before the priest on Sunday, and everything will be fine. I also find it interesting. I don't know how many of you have been to strip clubs in America. But it's interesting to observe strip clubs, because if you've been to some strip clubs around the United States, then what you'll notice is that the more religious a place is, put aside Vegas, which is just crazy, the more religious a place is, it seems there are more strip clubs, and the strip clubs are fancier. The best, the most elaborate strip clubs anywhere I've ever been to, putting aside Vegas again, are in Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, like in the Deep South. I don't know what you guys are kidding about. All right. And I think, again, that has to do with the fact that because Americans, and particularly kind of religious Americans, have this very repressed view of sex. And sex is something you can't talk about. Sex is something you don't really, sex is something you have with your wife, which you have to do, but it's not satisfying because you can't really talk about it. You can't fully engage with it. And, so you have to go to a strip club to let it out, to let it loose, and you kind of sit at home and watch pornography. Pornography's massive, right? So it really is fascinating. It really is fascinating to me the extent to which strip clubs, for example, are popular in the U.S., and they're not that popular in a secular place like Europe, which has, I think, which is a far less repressed culture when it comes to sex. Sex is more open. Sex is more communicated. People don't feel like it's a sin and they can't do it. They can only do so many things with their wives, and therefore they have to go find external outlets and all this stuff. Sex is much more open and less constrained. And look, there are lots of Christians who have a different attitude towards sex, but that's because in that you're not Christian, right? Most American Christians are not Christian. John Allison always says, these Christians, they pretend they're Christians. They're not Christians. They want to make money. They want to be happy. They want to have sex. That's not Christian. That's being American. That's being secular. The beauty of Christianity, the reason Christianity does so well in the world in which we live in today, is because it's being secularized by the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment basically said, you go to church on Sunday, there's a God out there, you pray to the God, you do the thing with it, that's fine. And day-to-day life, the day-to-day life that you live by reason, you live to be happy on this earth. And that's modern Christianity in America. That's not Christian. That's not real Christianity. That's your distortion in order to be successful in the modern life. And because you love sex. But if you read the Old Testament seriously, then you're not, and you read the Catholics, what the Catholic popes have written about sex, not to talk about all the sex they've had, then that's not right. That's not the right religious attitude towards sex. You're distorting your own religion to satisfy your own whims. Anyway, what else? Cultures and sex. On the other hand, if you go to somewhere like, I don't know, like certain parts of Asia, like Thailand, sex is they don't think about it in kind of Christian, so it's just something you do. It doesn't have a spiritually elevated dimension as it would under objectivism, like as a really, really important thing. And it doesn't have this idea of sin associated with it at all. And it's just something human beings do. And, and it's much more transactional, as some people mentioned here. And I think ancient civilizations viewed sex as much more transactional. And somebody wrote Christianity is being tamed. And that's true, it's being tamed. It was tamed by the Enlightenment, by reason. So it's not real. You can pretend to be a Christian, but you're not really a Christian. You want to see how Christians lived. You go back to the 13th century and you can see how Christians lived. Or go back to Calvin's Geneva, or go read what Luther actually said. Go read Luther's writings about the status of this world and the status of sex. Don't take my word. Go read Luther. So in the East, particularly in a place like Thailand, I think, and in other places, sex is just one of the things human beings do, and you do it. And there's much more prostitution there, and a lot of people go from the sex tourism because the attitude of women there towards sex is far more, it's just natural, we just do it, whatever. It can be fun, it's enjoyable, but it's very, again, superficial and materialistic, right? It's a materialistic expression. So that's a whole different world out there. Now, not all Asia is the same. You've got far more conservative Asian cultures in which sex is very much protected, again, for similar reasons that I think it is in Christianity, for the same cultural reasons, different religious reasons, same cultural reasons. And then some cultures, it's just open. You have the Kama Sutra in India. I don't know how much that is truly embedded in India culture, but here are books with details of hundreds of different sexual poses and how to satisfy partners in all these kind of ways. Can you imagine that book being part of Christianity? No. Judaism maybe, but not Christianity. Judaism has a much more positive attitude towards sex, prostitution, having many wives, having many mistresses. Read the Old Testament. The Old Testament is filled. We used to, as kids, mark all the sex scenes in the Old Testament. We had them all marked up in our Bibles. We actually wrote in the Bibles, underlined all the sex scenes. And that was part of the fun of Bible class, is to find all the sex scenes and mark them. It's how I learned about sex. But you don't find that in Christianity. Christianity is, as I talked about last time when I talked about Christianity, it's a far more repressed, a far more defensive religion. It's not a world of religion of really embracing this world. It's inherent in Christianity, and because of the time, because of where it comes from, is the world out there sucks. We need to defend ourselves. We need to protect ourselves from the world out there. The physical, material world sucks. And that's because they were in a position of weakness. Position of weakness. Jesse said Christianity uses sex to control our lives. Absolutely. And so did the tribe, so did any cultures that prohibit or restrict or place restrictions on sex are trying to do. They're trying to control your life. They're trying to control you. It's part of control. It's an important part of life, too important a part of life for the authorities to ignore. And they try to use sex in order to control you as a consequence. Let's see. Jonathan asked, thoughts on Miss USA ditching swimsuit post Me Too? I mean, I have to admit, I'm not a fan of Miss USA. So, yeah, look, if the competition is a competition about beauty and about sexiness and about beautiful bodies, which is fine, I have no problem with that. I just find it superficial, and the girls are often just stupid. And, what would you wish for the world? Or the questions they ask them, they come off as just dumb. But then of course the swimsuit competition should be part of it, because if you have to evaluate beauty in body, the beautiful body, then the more of the body you can see, the better. Maybe the competition should be a nude competition. Why even have a swimsuit? Remember, the Greek Olympics the athletic competitions were done in the nude. So there's nothing wrong. There's nothing prohibitive about the naked body, particularly a beautiful naked body is something to be admired. It's a beautiful thing. So one of the benefits of strip clubs is you get to see beautiful naked bodies, and that's not a bad thing. That's a beautiful thing aesthetically. It's quite cool. So I think it's wrong to prohibit the swimsuit competition just because of Me Too, because I don't think Me Too relates to that. I don't think admiring a woman for her beauty or for her beautiful body or for her beautiful face, or admiring a man for his beautiful body or pretty face is wrong. Again, I think if that's all it is, if that's all you admire, and if you use that as a criteria to evaluate their work, where their work has nothing to do with, their physical appearance, then that's just wrong. That's just wrong. So, you have to separate it out. It's okay to admire somebody for their physical beauty. There's a certain sense in which that's an achievement, but there's a certain sense in which somebody taking care of their body is a good thing. It's something to compliment somebody on. But using that as a criteria for, a computer programmer is ridiculous. It's just irrational, and the irrational is the immoral, and you shouldn't do it. That makes sense? So I think there's a lot of conflating going on with the Me Too movement in terms of conflating what is a real problem with now any time you compliment a woman on how she looks, or any time you look at a woman because she's beautiful, or anything like that is conflated with harassment. That is wrong. But when it's done inappropriately, it's wrong. And you have to be able to separate what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. A lot of things in life, there's a context in which something is appropriate, and there's a context in which it's not appropriate. Oh, wow. Okay, Jesse's asking an unrelated question. Okay, I'll get to it. All right, any other questions about, I guess, sex, or about this topic of the Me Too issue before I take some of these other questions that we got? If I can find them. Where are they? There they are. All right, there it is. All right, good. So let's switch topics, and it looks like I'm not going to be able to cover the other topics I promised to cover because we're already almost at an hour. But let's do this. Okay, so we're completely shifting topics, right? At what point would you support an armed revolution against the government? Ayn Rand gave 3 criteria for that. And I guess I would add a 4th criteria. So you have to be convinced that there is no hope to save the country other than through armed revolution. And to do that, I think you have to, basically the most important of these is there are no elections, there's no way to influence the political process, and the key there is there's no free speech. Free speech is being eliminated. At that point, once you take reason out of the equation, once you say reason is not applicable to this, to convince, you can't convince people anymore. You can't fight for your values using your mind. You can't fight for your values using ideas. Once you can't do that, then all you have is force. So censorship, the abolition of free speech by the government, which is the only agency that can abolish free speech that can censor, would be a major criteria. And then I would add that you have to have a sense that you could win. And that is the best option that you have to live a good life, because I think the other option is to leave, is to move to another country. So let's say in the United States, we got a dictator, authoritarian, there's no free speech, and now I have an option, fight or go to New Zealand, where there's still freedom, let's say. You have to take that into account, right? So that would be my criteria. To some extent, I think we're close to the point where I think it would be justified, but I wouldn't support it because I think there's still free speech enough to be able to fight it, and I think we would lose, and it would be a bloodbath. Okay. All right, let's see. Maybe I can still do Jack Ryan because Jack Ryan's pretty quick, but let's answer a few more of these. They're quick. Should we legalize the sale of organs? Why and why not? Yes, absolutely you should legalize the sale of organs. There's no violation of individual rights, so why would you make it illegal? It's my body, my organs. I have a right to commit suicide. I should be able to kill myself if I want. I should be able to have somebody rip out my what do you have 2 of? You have 2 kidneys, right? One of my kidneys to be able to give to somebody else. Why not? Right? So I don't see the reason not to. Now, it's true that poor people in India or wherever, I don't want to pick on India, would have now an incentive to sell their organs. Okay. It would make their life marginally better. They're poor. If they can make a little bit of money from a kidney, why take that ability away from them? And indeed, there's a black market today in organs. You take away that black market. Black market, which is dangerous because they have the organs removed in unsanitary conditions, in horrible conditions, and it's just not, so it's really, really bad. Selling organs is legal in Singapore. I didn't know that. I want to check that. I want to check that that's really the case. So selling and buying organs should be legal. There's no violation of individual rights here. And it actually, you have, it's yours. Your body is yours. It should be legal to prostitute your body. It should be legal to inject your body with dangerous drugs. It should be legal to do what you want with your body as long as doing what you do with your body is not inflicting harm on somebody else in some bizarre way, right? Have you been to Disneyland, and what's your thoughts on it? Yeah, I've been to Disneyland many times. It's fun. It's a blast. I wouldn't go too often because I've been there, done that, and it gets a little boring after a while. But it's fun. It's what is it? Something about happiness. There's something about happiness in the logo, in the motto of Disneyland, and it's great. It's particularly for kids. As an adult, it still can be fun, but it's limited to fun. And so I'm a huge fan of Disneyland, of amusement parks, of I don't do roller coasters. Can't do them. I was a fan when I was young. Can't do them anymore. Just not worth it. So I don't like roller coasters, if that's a question. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Disneyland. Big fan of Vegas, because I view Vegas as somewhat Disneyland for adults. let's see. Do I have pets? No, I do not have pets. I've never had pets. Don't get pets. Don't understand pets. Don't like animals in my house. Don't want an animal in my house. I don't care. Dogs, cats, rats, whatever. I just don't do it. It's not that I hate them. It's just I don't get it. I don't get it. Love and affection I get from my wife. And used to for my kids. Not anymore. No, I don't. I know all my friends have pets. All my friends love pets. So it's not that they have anything against people who have pets. Don't take me not liking pets as meaning anything other than I don't like pets. And my wife doesn't like pets. And so we reinforce it each other. I just don't get it. And I didn't have pets growing up. Maybe that's part of it. And I wanted pets growing up. I wanted a dog when I was growing up. But we lived in apartments and could never have an apartment. Jonathan Honing has an amazing pet. Leonard has an amazing dog. And he loves his dog. And I like his dog. But I wouldn't want a dog living with me. I just don't see it. I love people who love pets. So don't take me not loving pets personally. All right. All right. Zach is done with me because I don't like dogs. He's done. Done with me. Can you say hi to Corey? Hey, Corey. I love Corey. Corey's one of my loyal listeners. He's a great guy. He's made great comments on my various posts on Facebook, been around for a long time. Is Corey okay? I hope so. Hope so. He is a great guy. All right. Hi, Corey. Hope you're doing okay. So if there's an issue, let me know. Let's see. There was a question. Somebody asked about having sex for the sake of having children. I mean, that's great. I mean, when you have sex with the goal of having kids, I think it makes the sex more enjoyable because there is there's just another dimension to it, right? There's more. There's just one more thing to be added to it. So I'm all for it. So it's great to have sex with the intention of having kids. I think you want to limit the number of kids you have, and you don't want to limit the amount of sex you have. So that's important. But yeah, I mean, I'm all for having sex for the sake of having kids when you want to have kids. Ayn Rand had a cat. Ayn Rand loved cats, just on the pets issue. Difference between a right and a privilege. Wow. A right is a freedom. It's the recognition of your freedom, the fact that you are free to pursue the rational values necessary for your life. It is a recognition of your moral, of the fact that freedom is yours morally. That as a individual, you are morally responsible for your own life and your own freedom, and therefore must be left free. Free of what? Free of coercion. A privilege is something you are granted, something you are given, something additional, something that makes you better or different. The two are completely unrelated. Rights are not privileges. Privileges are not rights. Government should not give privileges. The only job of government is to protect rights. In other words, to protect freedom, freedom from coercion. The only job of government is to protect you from force, from coercion, from authority backed by a gun. So the government protects rights. It doesn't give you rights. Privileges are something that is given. And government has no authority, no rights, no legitimacy to provide privileges. I hope I answered that question, although I'm sure that creates other questions, right? Let me see, what else? Oh, okay, so let's do quickly these stories. Jack Ryan. Everybody know who Jack Ryan is? He's a character out of Tom Clancy, a series of Tom Clancy books. I enjoyed those books when I read them. I can't remember their names, but Jack Ryan used to return as a featured character, a really good character, smart, so always emphasizing the brainy part of, even though they were action-driven novels, there was always an aspect of the brain, so of reason, of figuring out, of solving problems. So I liked I like Jack Clancy. I like Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan's books. I don't think he's a great author. I don't think they're great books, but they were fun to read years and years ago when I read them. So the reason I brought it up is that there's now a Amazon Prime Video series, new television show called Jack Ryan, and it reinvents the character of Jack Ryan. Starts out as he's young and puts him in the world today, and of course in the world today he's fighting terrorism, and it's an action story, and so all of that. So it's not bad. It's okay as an action story. But what I found interesting, and it just struck me that this is something that happens more and more and more today, and that is that in the modern world, they have to create motivation for the villain. So they have to explain why the villain is a bad guy, and why the villain is evil, why he's killing. Why he wants to destroy the West, why he's killing everybody in the name of Islam, which is the villain in the story in Jack Ryan. And that the explanation is always in terms of something the West did to him and his family in the past. And I was watching it last night, and I was going, oh my God, this is so stupid. And it keeps repeating itself. So I see this in movie after movie after movie after movie. It starts with a story of a young kid whose house is bombed, whether it's in Afghanistan or in Iraq or in this case in Lebanon. In this case, it must be the Israelis who bombed him, because it was the 1983 war in Lebanon. And his house is bombed, his family's murdered, and he's crippled and whatever. And this creates a lifelong hatred in him, which turns him into a master terrorist who wants to blow up and kill everybody in the world. Right? Now, if that is, the fact is that I don't know many terrorists that actually experienced that. Bin Laden came from a very upper-class family, wealthy family, went to university and was radicalized in university. The terrorists on 9/11, none of them as far as I know, had a family trauma related to violence committed by the West against them. Palestinians, yeah, maybe some of the Palestinian terrorists, but many of the Palestinian terrorists are middle class, well educated, and you can't find a particular specific grievance that they had. Did Yasser Arafat's family get all killed, wiped out by the Israelis? I don't think so. So this is a myth, and the cause of the myth is philosophical in a sense. It's the fact that in our modern culture, people cannot imagine that ideas are the causes of action, that ideas are what motivate action. So they can't imagine that it's religion. They can't imagine that it's actually Islam driving these people. Not a particular interpretation of Islam, but Islam nonetheless. Right? That all the terrorists are motivated by ideas. Hitler was motivated by ideas, not by a trauma in his youth, not by, I don't know, his experience in World War I, not by being molested as a child, I don't know, whatever, but by philosophy, by ideas that he held. The explanation for why people do what they do is the ideas that they hold plus the psychology that they have. But you can't explain everything in terms of psychology, and even the psychology that they have is not determined by their experience that they have, but is determined, again, to a large extent, or to some extent, by the ideas that they hold. So I thought it was interesting, just watching it, that I thought I would mention it, that here's this show, and they had to create what they would consider a credible villain. They have to have him traumatized by the Israelis, I guess, in order to make him credible. He can't just be radicalized by the ideas of Islam. Okay. By the way, it's so far, I've seen, I think, 3 episodes. I was binge watching it last night, and it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's not great, but it's pretty good. All right, what was the other thing? Oh yeah, it's big news. Big news. Starbucks is finally opening up a coffee shop in Italy. It's been trying to do so for 30 years, since the founding of Starbucks. After all, Starbucks modeled itself, in terms of the terminology at least, after Italy. It's a venti coffee, a grande, right? And the intellectuals, the elites in Italy are shocked. This is horrible. Oh my God. They're bringing mediocre coffee to Italy. And the question, the big question on Italians' minds is, does Italy need Starbucks? Does Italy need Starbucks? Now, remember, Italy is the land of espresso and cappuccino. Italy is the land in which different parts of the day you drink different coffees in different ways. It's an art. It's an art. And yet, Italy, with all its political problems, and all its economic problems, and all its cultural problems, is worried about Starbucks. Right? Is it going to destroy coffee culture? Now, Italians drink coffee differently. They tend to drink it standing up at a bar. There's no takeaway coffee in Italy. There's no such thing as takeaway coffee in Italy. You don't walk around town with a cup of coffee in your hand, sipping it. You just don't do it. So, what do, right? But I thought it's interesting because in spite of Italians' horror, particularly Italians' intellectual horror, but the idea of opening a Starbucks, when they opened a roastery. It's this big store with kind of museum on how Starbucks makes coffee and all this stuff. There was a line around the block when it opened. Now, it had a opening gala kind of thing. Greg says later in the series in Ryan that it is religion that radicalizes the boy. So good, I'm glad there's something. But it reminds me of so many other shows and movies where this is a phenomena. But it's good to know that at least in this series they'll recognize the role of ideas at some point. So Starbucks is this event space. But this is what this one commentator wrote about it. He says, opening of Starbucks, he says, as an Italian, he views it as a humiliation. How dare they, right? It's insulting to have Starbucks in Italy, right? He says it represents a philosophy, not just coffee. It represents a philosophy, which is awful, as well as a sort of office for people who don't have an office, right? People sit there in a Starbucks and they sip coffee and they work. What's up with that? Working while sipping coffee. You're not supposed to do that. Working generally in Italy is frowned upon. Now, I'm exaggerating, but only a little bit. The Italians on the chat can confirm, right? Now, he also says, on the other hand, Starbucks has this hospitality attitude towards it. It's friendly. And he says, maybe our coffee bars, in Italy they call them bars, will become more hospitable. So maybe there's a positive to Starbucks arriving in Italy. Then, he gets really upset. And he says, I wonder how many of the 350 jobs announced in Milan will go to young Italians and how many to young immigrants. So suddenly, Starbucks is responsible for illegal immigration into Italy, I guess. Somehow there's a connection. They just don't want Starbucks in Italy. And what they're really afraid of is that Starbucks will be successful. And this idea of drinking coffee from a takeaway cup and sipping it and taking your time with it and enjoying it instead of having this little. What I don't like about espresso is that it's little. I like to sip my coffee. I like to enjoy it. I like to sit down. I like to do a little bit of work. I like it to be a relaxing experience. Coffee fits that. Espresso is like rushed. It's small. And it's gone. So you have to have a double espresso, and then it gets you all wired up like I am right now because I've drunk 4 cups of coffee today already. So, I don't know. So, this is the question. Starbucks has 30,000 stores in 77 countries, including 3,400 stores in China, 45,000 employees in China. It's pretty amazing. Now, Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, one of the great American corporations, one of the great success stories, is a lefty. He might even run for president. Do you guys drink Starbucks coffee? All those who don't believe businessmen can be that you should hate businessmen because if they're lefties. Right? I wonder. What's the most brilliant coffee in the world? Italian coffee, espresso, or Starbucks? I don't know. I'm not sure what Rob is talking about. So one of the things that's happening in Italy, which is interesting, here's Schultz created this amazing franchise, amazing business, just stunning, one of the great business successes of the 21st century. One of the problems is that Italians are just jealous. Because they don't have any large, successful businesses. I think, most American business, Italian coffee is really amazing. So, but does Italy need Starbucks? We'll find out because they'll compete. That's the beauty of competition. If Italian coffee truly is, objectively, in the marketplace, better than Starbucks, then Starbucks will not be able to expand and grow and be successful in Italy. But if Starbucks is offering people a different experience of drinking coffee, this, by the way, is Nespresso. Is Nespresso Italian? Probably. It offers a different experience. Maybe it'll be successful, right? Let the free market decide. Let them have it. But part of what some of the commentators have been saying is Italians are just jealous of the fact that it's a national brand, that Italians didn't create. How come some guy in Seattle created the #1 brand in coffee in the world? How come it wasn't an Italian in Rome? They should have created this amazing brand. So I think part of it is that. All right, we've got another. I just thought that was an amusing story. And I look forward, and it's interesting because the Starbucks is opening in the most Northern European of all Italian countries, cities, which is Milan. It reminds me of when a McDonald's opened in France, and the French go, "Oh, McDonald's here. McDonald's will fail. We French, we know food, and McDonald's, that ain't food. We're not going to be successful." And they're massively successful in France. McDonald's is a huge American fast food. Is amazingly successful in France. And the French hate it. I mean, the cultural, intellectual, pseudo-intellectual French, they hate it. Yeah. Oh, Nespresso is Swiss. There you go. So even Nespresso, this massive, successful coffee company, which I drink, is not even Italian. Italy, 90%, I think, of all people employed in Italy are employed by businesses that employ fewer than 15 people. So it is an economy of small businesses. That is not true in the United States and elsewhere, which are dominated by much larger businesses. Okay, here's a question, complicated question, I think. Rand's essay about a woman president. Rand states that it is not about a woman's ability, emotions, reason, or ambition. It is primarily about a woman's psychological character. What are your thoughts? Well, I mean, I have to admit that I agree with Rand. I share Rand's view of a woman's psychology in the sense that she said that the essence of femininity is man worship. The essence of masculinity of hero worship and man worship as a hero. And the essence of masculinity is orientation towards reality. And I think that's true. Now, again, that's not to say women can't be oriented towards reality. It doesn't say women cannot be rational. It doesn't say anything about any of that. It's a psychological orientation. It's an aspect of who you are, to be man or female, to be feminine or masculine. And you can have feminine aspects in you, and you can have masculine aspects of you, even if you're, we have both. It's where the emphasis isn't. As a man, the emphasis is masculinity. As a female, it's femininity. I think there's certainly something about the sex that is, there's a difference between how men and how women experience sex, and how the sexual act is different for a man and for a woman. And I think that has a psychological reflection. The being penetrated versus being a penetrator. It's different. Now, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to get into the details of this, but generally, I agree with Rand's essay, and I know that's controversial in objectivism, and not everybody agrees, and I don't think that essay is a part of the philosophy. So I don't think if you disagree with the essay, you're non-objectivist, or you don't agree with the philosophy of objectivism. I think it is more of a psychological essay. Now, Rand often combined psychology with philosophy. She was a genius at that. But I think that essay is primarily psychological. I can understand why people disagree with it. And I would encourage you to think about it, and maybe it's a topic we'll bring up with one of our objective psychologists and see what they have to say about it. But I find the essay fairly convincing and consistent with my experience, as limited as it might be with the opposite sex, right? All right, we went an hour and 20 minutes, in spite of me not wanting to. All right, I hope you guys share the show. I hope you subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. And I hope you enjoyed it. And please use the Super Chat in the future to ask questions. If you subscribe, if you contribute on Patreon, then you can participate in our survey every month for questions for me to answer. And I've answered a lot of the questions from this month. We'll get a new batch later this month. This was actually August's. We'll be doing September soon. And that's it. Have a great day. Have a great rest of the weekend. Somebody asked me to comment on Thatcher. I'm a huge Thatcher fan. So I don't think her essay excludes the possibility that a woman would be the best option for president. I think what the essay says is that a completely healthy woman in touch with her femininity through and through wouldn't want to be president. The parliamentary system is also different than a president, but it's also, it wouldn't change. I would vote for a woman president if I thought she was best qualified. That is, it wouldn't prohibit me from voting for a woman, as given the state of politics in the world today, and it doesn't prohibit me at all from identifying Margaret Thatcher as a great prime minister, as one of the better politicians of the last 50 years, maybe the best global leaders of the last 50 years, better than anybody the United States has produced over the last 50 years. All right, tomorrow it will be at 8 p.m. Eastern time, so it'll be in the evening, and we'll see after tomorrow. The next show I'm pretty certain of is on Thursday with Ben Baer. We'll be discussing conspiracy theories. So, and even as a woman, I wonder what Ayn Rand would say if you asked her this question. If you said to her, basically, look, the world is falling apart. There are no men who can rise up to the challenge of saving the country, of doing what is right to make the country successful. You're a woman, you're in politics, and you are it. If you run, you'll win and you can save the world. If you don't because you want to, but there's no man to do it, would you do it? And I think she would, I don't want to speak for Ayn Rand. I would say, yes, run in spite of that. If the value of saving the world is high enough, then I think it would be worth doing. Oh, wait. Good. Talk to you all tomorrow. I'm not sure what I'll cover tomorrow. There's at least one thing I want to do in healthcare. There's some other stuff. There's some yeah, I'm sure we'll come up with some interesting stuff. And of course, we can use the super chat and we will have a good time. Talk to you tomorrow. And don't forget again, Patreon. Support the show. Help me produce these shows. Help make more shows like this. I hope you're getting value. Show appreciation for the value you're getting. If you're not getting value, all right. Talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.